Got another question. He says, how can we best defend the following proposition? Quote, God was plausibly justified in not explicitly outlawing slavery.
Yeah, what we see is in the ancient Near East, well, within Israel, we see, and I elaborate on this in the book, where keep in mind that when people hear the term slavery, they're often thinking of the antebellum South, and they're thinking of a scenario that is just so far removed from what is going on in Israel that this is something that we have I think a term servant is better than, quote, slave, and we have a couple of indicators that this is something that is radically distinct in that, one, yes, people are impoverished and they need some sort of a way to sustain themselves, and becoming indentured servants is the best way, given the ancient Near Eastern structures, to do that. Secondly, you have foreign runaway slaves who have the capacity to attach themselves to Israelite households without the threat of being sent back. And again, in ancient Near Eastern law codes, this is a requirement, death penalty if you harbored a runaway slave. And nations in the ancient Near East had extradition treaties to send back runaway slaves to their point of origin. Not so with Israel. Israel was to be a refuge from that kind of oppression. So we have the capacity for runaway, people to go and settle in any of Israel's cities, but we also have the possibility of entering into, Exodus 21, of entering into servitude freely or not continuing with it. So you have in the person who says, I love my employer / master, and so you go through a ceremony to attach yourself to that person for the rest of your days. So David Kleins, who an Old Testament scholar, just died recently, but a well-recognized name, he says that these two texts, the runaway and also voluntarily continuing on to be a servant in someone's household, he says these fundamentally undermine the very institution of slavery, that these texts now make it not something that is something that is forcible against someone's will. And in fact, when we get to Deuteronomy, to Leviticus 25, the person who is those people who come as strangers and aliens who are working in Israel, they can work for the Israelites. But it says that if a person who is one of these workers, if that person becomes a person of means, he can actually hire an Israelite to work for him. Now, it's not ideal, but that's the possibility that you can actually rise up and become a person of means. And it's interesting that the same language that's used of you may acquire these servants from other nations, that same language is used of that foreigner who becomes a person of means who may, quote, acquire an Israelite. And so again, that language is really interchangeable, but fundamentally it's a different institution. It is something different. It is regulated and that's why you have the 6-year term limit for keeping an indentured servant, and you couldn't keep him beyond that unless it was voluntary. And so that there were certain strictures in place to, again, regulate and keep from abuse. And when you read, say, Amos and Jeremiah, there's a warning against those who are taking advantage of their servants, keeping them longer, that this is a violation of the law of God and brings harm to them and is an abuse of power and so forth. So those are a few things perhaps to keep in mind on that servitude question.